Hey YouTube, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be about my experience with both benzodiazepine and antidepressant withdrawal, so I apologize in advance, this might be a long video. So I'll give you a little bit of background information. So I am currently 39 years old and I've had anxiety and OCD type symptoms since I was about 5. So I struggled with that all through school, like just more anxiety than I felt like my classmates and friends had. I often had stomach aches, I missed a lot of school. I just struggled with feeling anxious a lot of the time. And I mean, I know a lot of people kind of say that nowadays. It's almost trendy to talk about having an anxiety disorder, but it truly can really affect your world. So I had a really hard time with that, and a lot of, obsessive kind of strange thoughts. I didn't know where they came from, I didn't know what they were, and I never really asked for help. I was if you've seen any of my other videos, I was a very shy and withdrawn type of kid. Not completely withdrawn, like I had friends, but I was just very private and introverted. So I didn't really discuss my issues or what was going on with me. So when I was 22 years old in 2004, things really started to come to a head. So my obsessions got worse. I started having really severe panic attacks to the point where I would collapse. I would have derealization and depersonalization. So I just felt like I couldn't connect. I felt like everyone around me was a stranger. I felt almost like I was seeing the world behind a veil, if that makes any sense. If you've never experienced depersonalization or derealization, it's kind of hard to describe. It's a dissociation, but it puts you into this weird state of mind that can be really quite scary. So again, I didn't know what was going on with me, but I was losing the ability to work and function normally. So at the time I was living with my parents, and my mom had talked to her friend about what I was going through, and she suggested a book to her that I could read, and it was called From Panic to Power by Lucinda Bassett. And once I read that book, it was just like, hallelujah. The song was playing in the background because I was just like, this finally makes sense. It finally makes sense to me what's been going on with me my whole life. Like, I have some type of anxiety disorder. Like, I fit the description to a T. And even at that point, I never saw a doctor or a psychiatrist. I just started to sort of do what she recommended in the book and do what she did to relieve herself of her anxiety disorder. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't other types of mental disorders that require professional help. I'm not saying that at all. It just, at the time, that was my choice, was just to follow along with her recommendations, and they truly tremendously helped me. It took me a little while, but after, I would say, a few months of really practicing what she talked about and sort of almost putting together my own plan, I was literally free of 90% of my symptoms. I could not believe it. And after that, I went to university. I moved away from home. I mean, I felt free. It was truly incredible. It's not to say that I never ever had any symptoms again, but when they cropped up, they were much more manageable. I understood them. I understood where they came from, what they meant and what they didn't mean, and how to deal with them. So I never took any medication at that time. I never saw a psychiatrist, like I said, or a doctor. I really felt like I was living a full life at that point. So fast forward to 2011, I was 29 years old at the time, and I was still living away from home. I had finished university, and I was working in a job that I absolutely hated. So I had one that I loved before that, but unfortunately I got laid off, and then I had to pay my bills, so I took the first job that I got hired at after that, and I absolutely hated the job. It turned out that the job required some heavy lifting, which I was not told when I was hired, and I had previously had whiplash from a car accident, and so I was actually under care of a physiotherapist, and I don't remember if I had any other doctors at that time, chiropractic, and all of my treatments were being paid for under my insurance because I had been rear-ended, and so I was covered for a year of treatment. So I was undergoing this treatment, and I wasn't supposed to do heavy lifting. So I had a note from my doctor saying this, and my job still let me go. I mean, I probably could have fought it, but I hated the job so much. I was like, I don't even care. And after that, I just luckily had some money saved up. So I just lived and didn't work. And I sort of just laid in bed. And I was getting depressed because I was like, I loved that job so much, like the one before. And I was like, why did I have to get laid off? What am I going to do now? And I just was in sort of a transitioning time in my life. I was just kind of unhappy with a lot of different things. I wasn't really sure. I was close to turning 30, didn't have a job, was finished school, didn't have a relationship, was living in a place that I didn't like with a roommate that I didn't like. And so my life kind of felt like it was falling apart. So I got depressed. I stayed in bed for about a month. I have been diabetic for many years, and I wasn't really taking care of myself. I wasn't really cooking or preparing proper food. I wasn't exercising. I wasn't socializing. I just was getting really depressed, and it was getting the best of me. So at that point, I decided to see my doctor. So he ended up prescribing me 20 milligrams of the SSRI antidepressant Citalopram. And I remember him telling me, you know, it's a pretty mild drug. It's one of those ones that, you know, you don't get addicted to easily. It's pretty easy to come off of. And so I thought, great, I'm willing to try whatever because I'm sick of living the way I'm living. So I started taking the drug, and honestly, it was like a miracle. I remember just within probably 2 weeks feeling alive again. I didn't feel depressed. I had all of this energy. I was sleeping like a baby. I ended up getting my old job back, the one that I loved, but I got a permanent position full time. And I was like, this is amazing. I met a bunch of amazing people at work. My life completely turned around. I didn't have any anxiety. I mean, most of that had been worked through, but I still had, you know, I still was sensitive to it. So, but after taking this drug, I was like, I don't feel any depression. I don't feel any anxiety. I don't feel anything. But my life was great. Like, I was socializing and doing all the things that I had been doing previously when I felt healthy. So I was like, this is great. My job progressed. So this was 2011. I started on this drug. And I do remember a little bit of startup effects. So SSRIs are kind of notorious for having startup effects, but they didn't bother me, and I wasn't concerned. I do remember feeling more anxious at first, like I would say the first month, but I was like, I'm so used to anxiety. I've had it my whole life. I didn't even know it was startup effects. I thought it was maybe just from getting my old job back and just added responsibility. So I just pushed through, and eventually they went away, and I felt amazing. I truly felt amazing. So I stay at this job. I end up working my way up to management, and it's just my passion. I loved every minute of it. I didn't even feel like I was working. I would put in overtime. I mean, it was one of those things where I had never experienced doing a job that I loved so much. And so I was like, my life is finally in order. I got into a relationship. I moved out on my own. I got rid of my roommate. I moved into an apartment that I loved. So I had the job, the relationship, the apartment, the friends. I mean, my life was great. So I've continued to feel great. Like I said, I moved up in my job, got a management position. I mean, things were just getting better and better. So fast forward to 2015. So I had been on the drug for 4 years at that point and still felt pretty good. And then in June of 2015, one of my best friends passed away of cancer. So she got it really, like, onset really quick, and it was, I mean, a rapid progression, and she died in like 6 months. And so that was devastating for me. And I remember after she died, it was like something just switched in my brain. And I started to feel, I mean, obviously I was hysterical when I found out the news, because she wasn't supposed to die. She died during a blood transfusion, which is not very common, I guess. But my world just felt flipped upside down. My relationship had ended, but I still was working the job that I loved. And yeah, so after that, like I said, it seemed like something switched in my brain. I got really what they call anhedonic. So I just felt absolutely nothing. Like, I remember going to a counselor and just being like, I don't know if it's just because my friend died and I'm trying to grieve or what's going on, but I just feel like life is meaningless. I feel like I had this job I loved, and on paper everything was still going fairly well, but I just felt so much emptiness. And I was like, I just am questioning, why are we here? Why does it feel like we're just putting in time until we die? Like all of these weird kind of existential questions I started having. And she said that was pretty normal for going through a death. And she gave me these books to read, but nothing was really shifting. And I remember it just getting worse and worse. And I wanted to start engaging in like a bit more reckless behavior and doing sort of thrill seeking. And I was looking into getting a job as a cop, like, because I remember thinking at least then I'd have a chance of getting shot and then that would make me feel alive. Like really weird thinking. And I just felt so much emptiness, and I had been seeing this other guy at that time and it just wasn't going anywhere. And I don't know, my life was just changing. And then at the end of 2015, November, I had decided to start doing some online dating. And I met this guy that lived 2 hours away, and I remember telling him I'm not interested in a long distance relationship, and I'm sorry, but no. And this guy was super persistent, and he's like, how do you know if you don't try, and blah blah blah. And so then he was just so, like I said, persistent. He wouldn't take no for an answer. So we started messaging each other, texting, adding each other to social media, talking on the phone. And then one weekend, about 2 or 3 weeks after we started talking, he's like, I'm gonna come meet you. And I was like, yeah, okay, I've heard that before. And sure enough, he showed up Saturday at about noon, and it was just like love at first sight. And I was just like smitten immediately, and we started dating long distance. And this definitely helped kind of my situation as far as, feeling just kind of empty and like I was a little bit lost in life again. And so we date long distance for a year, and I'm just like blissfully happy at this point. So like that whole 2016 was just amazing for me. But at about mid 2016, I started noticing more and more kind of problems with my health. So I was having nocturnal panic attacks. I would shoot out of bed in the night and just be in this full-blown panic. I would have panic attacks that would start in the morning, and they would literally last all day. And I just couldn't understand why. I'm in the relationship of my dreams. Like, it was my first serious long-term relationship, and I was like 33 at this point. And so I still had the job I loved. I had an even better apartment that I moved into. I mean, it was amazing. I had a new car. I had like everything sort of, I guess, societal expectations of what makes someone happy I had. And I just couldn't understand why I was having these intense anxiety attacks again, nocturnal panic attacks. I wasn't feeling that emptiness, but I just felt like something just wasn't right in my body. And I remember researching at work, like, what are the symptoms of burnout? Because I was a manager of a home for people with autism. I thought maybe I just had caregiver burnout. So I just couldn't figure out, why am I feeling this way? Why am I struggling again, kind of with my mental health and with just physical things? Like, I just didn't feel well. And so I couldn't figure it out. But then in November of 2016, so this was a year into my relationship, I decided, so my landlord was selling the house I was living in, because I was living in a basement suite. It was beautiful. And I thought I was burnt out from my job. And so I thought, okay, my job's kind of, burning me out, and I have to move because my landlord's selling the house. So maybe now would be a good time to move to my boyfriend's city. I mean, I was completely in love, and I thought maybe I just need a change. So this is where my life really started to change. So I decided to move to his city in November of 2016. I had a job lined up. It was similar to what I had been doing, but I thought maybe I just need a change of clientele. I mean, because I had been so passionate about that line of work for 6 years at that point, almost 6 years. And I thought maybe it was just, like I said, the clients, maybe I just needed a change. So I get the same type of job in a management position in my new town. And right away, I mean, my boss is a jerk. He is harassing me. I mean, I'm having all of these issues at work. I mean, it was an organization that was really poorly run. I was being worked into the ground. I was being asked to do 16-hour shifts. I mean, I had just moved and given up everything I had known for, at that point, I had lived in my previous city for 14 years, had the same job for 6, friends, everything had been established. Now I move, and I just feel like all of these adjustments are happening, and then I get this horrible boss and this horrible job. And so that was in November. Like I said, I moved there. And then in December of that year, I went to my boyfriend's Christmas party. Now, I had went to his Christmas party the year before in 2015 after a month of dating. And it was honestly the funnest Christmas party I'd ever been at in my life. And so I was like so excited to go in 2016. But that day, I remember being like, I don't feel good. Like, again, I couldn't really pinpoint it. I'm like, I just don't feel good. And, I was like, but you know, I'll just have a couple of drinks, go to this Christmas party, everything will be like it was the year before. And at this point, I had been on my drugs for 5 years and I had gained 20 to 25 pounds. I mean, I had kind of standard side effects of SSRIs at this point. Inability to orgasm. I mean, those are two really common side effects of SSRIs, weight gain and libido issues. So I had definitely had those at that point. So I go to this Christmas party and literally in the middle of it, I get up, I grab my keys and I pretend I'm going to the bathroom and I leave. And I call my mom and I'm like, Mom, I am so suicidal. Like, I just want to die. I can't even explain it. It's like this feeling just washed over me. I don't know what's wrong. Like, I'm out with him. I'm at this Christmas party. Everything in my life is as it should be. And I just want to die. Like, I was just bawling my eyes out. And I get a call and a text from my boyfriend. And he's like, where did you go? And I'm like, I had to leave. And he said, well, were you planning on telling me? I mean, we were in your car. And I just was like, I don't know why. I just can't be there. So then he's like, okay, well, I'm coming to see you. So I went to his place and then he met me there and I'm like, you know, he comforted me and he couldn't really understand. He's like, I kind of wish he wouldn't have just ran out, you know, and we kind of had a disagreement over it, but everything was okay. So the next day I spent the whole day in bed drinking. I mean, I was drinking by myself in bed all day on a Sunday. And at that point, my alcohol consumption had really started to get out of control. So I had always been a party girl. I had always been someone who liked going out and liked having drinks. But starting in about 2013, 2014, I really started to drink more and more and more. I didn't know why. I just started to drink to cope with everything. I mean, I was drinking in the mornings, I was drinking before work, at work. It was progressively getting worse and worse and worse. And so this day in around Christmas of 2016, I spent all day in bed drinking. And I'm like, I don't know what's wrong with me, but I'm so miserable. And even though my life is as it should be and how I always wanted it to be, I just couldn't understand. Okay, sorry about that. So as I was saying, so I spent all day in bed drinking. And I stayed at my job for another 2 months probably, and then I just had enough. And my boyfriend is like, I'm having a hard time seeing you so stressed out all the time. Like, my boss was just such a jerk, and I was so stressed out. And so I ended up quitting my job, and everything really started to snowball downhill after that. So I got involved in a network marketing company. I didn't really know anything about it. I just was like, okay, I'm going to invest in this and then I'm going to make all my money back. I'm going to be self-employed. I won't have to deal with burnout anymore and bosses. And so I started racking up my credit cards, which was not smart, but I really truly believed that I was going to make my money back fast. So I'm unemployed. I'm racking up credit card debt with this network marketing business. And then I get a job at the school. And so I'm working as an education assistant, but the hours are inconsistent because it was just a casual position. The pay wasn't great, but it was really low stress. So I was like, okay, this is perfect for me. So I go through all of 2017 doing this, and things were okay. Like, my health was not great, but it wasn't super bad, and I was functioning and things were going okay. So I make it through all of 2017. 2018 rolls around and I realize, like, I start really looking at my finances. And I'm like, wow, I've let this get so far out of control. I was in such deep debt. I had collectors calling me every single day. I was in so much trouble. I was 3 months behind on almost all of my bills. I was defaulting on my car payments. I was having a hard time contributing to my household because at that point my boyfriend and I were living together, and we had been together for 2.5 years then. And so I'm like drowning in debt, and I was dishonest with him. I didn't tell him what I had been doing with my, racking up my debt and not paying my bills on time and not making enough money. And it was just getting really bad. So in February of 2018, I decide, I really, really need to start, taking care of my money situation. getting myself, because I was so stressed out. I mean, it was so bad that I couldn't even put $3 of gas in my car. I would calculate how many kilometers it was to drive from my house to whatever school I was working at that day to see how much gas I'd have to put in, and it would be like $3-4. So I would take money out of my boyfriend's coin jar and I would go put $3 of gas in the morning just to get to school. I mean, I was on the verge of losing everything. I had blocked all these collectors from calling me because it was just, they were just blowing up my phone every day. I mean, things were going to the credit bureau. I was getting letters in the mail. It was really, really stressful. So I decided, okay, enough is enough. I'm going to go on this plan. I decided to do this debt recovery plan, or this getting out of debt plan. Sorry if there's a helicopter, I think, outside. This getting out of debt plan. And I was like, I have to cut all unnecessary expenses. I can't live with this much stress anymore. I have to just, get my life in order. And so I was like, how can I cut every single thing that's unnecessary out of my life? And I was like, okay, well, I don't think my antidepressant's really doing anything anymore, so I'm going to stop taking it because I need to save the money that I spend on it every month, which is not very much. So I went and saw a doctor and I said, how do I come off this medication? And he gave me a tapering schedule, which had me off of it in 4 weeks. And at that point, I had been taking it for 7 years. So I decided to follow his weaning schedule. So I cut my pill in half, I take it for 2 weeks, and then I take that same half dose every other day for 2 weeks, and I'm done. And that was truly when my life changed forever. So at that point, I was so serious about getting out of debt. It was now, what month was it? I believe April of 2018. So I had 2 months left to work at the school. And then I was like, okay, now I'm getting into like hardcore. I need to get out of debt. So I got a job as a nanny full-time for the summer, Monday to Friday, 8 hours a day. I got a part-time position as a receptionist. So I would work 4 to 6, 2 days a week. So I would work as a nanny 7:15 to 3:15. Then as a receptionist from 4 to 6, that was 2 days a week. Plus every other Saturday, like all day. I also had a casual job in a group home, and I was also an autism interventionist casually for a family. So I had 4 jobs because I was like, I gotta get out of debt. And so I start working these 4 jobs, and I'm like, none of them were really inherently stressful, but I was at the group home one day in April. I think it was at the end of April. So this was about 2 weeks after I stopped taking my antidepressant. And I was talking to one of my coworkers, and I just started getting these flashes in my mind of like these violent, intrusive thoughts. And I was like, whoa, where did that come from? And then they just kept flashing and flashing and flashing. And I'm just like, like what's happening to my brain? I couldn't understand it. And I'm like, it's been a long time since I've had OCD thoughts. And I started having panic attacks because of these OCD thoughts, and I had no idea why. So on my days off around this time, I would spend all day in bed because I was getting so incredibly ill. I was so fatigued. I would sleep 14, 15 hours a night. My face was always swollen. I had horrific migraines, horrific stomach aches, intense anxiety. When I wasn't extremely fatigued, I couldn't sleep at all. Intrusive thoughts like all day long, and I'm like, what is going on with me? Like, why? And I didn't correlate any of it to stopping the antidepressant because I had no idea that could happen.
I'm just not sure how to keep doing this for another day. I just have such severe intrusive thoughts. Life is not supposed to be like this.
And I was told by my doctor who prescribed it that it would be easy to come off. So there was no correlation made whatsoever between coming off the drug and having these symptoms. So I continued to go to work, but it was such an intense struggle. I started calling in sick a lot because I would just have these days where I was completely bedridden. And it was putting a huge strain on my relationship because my boyfriend was like, what's wrong with you? Why did you change overnight? I don't get it. Neither of us had any idea. And so I went through 8 months of all of these symptoms. And so that was in April of 2018 that I stopped. Then in September, I had been going through really intense daily symptoms for 5 months, and I got so bad that I ended up calling mental health crisis because I was suicidal. Breaking things and making holes in the wall. Things that were completely out of my character. So they referred me to a psychiatrist, and they said, could be a little bit of a wait, but I'm like, that's okay as long as I know I'm getting help. So I have to wait 2 months to see the psychiatrist. So I finally get an appointment in November of 2018. So at this point, I had been off the drugs for 7 months. And in October, so the month before my appointment, I suddenly had a huge lifting of my symptoms. My intrusive thoughts that were so relentless were gone. I didn't feel anxiety anymore. I just felt more like myself. And I wish now I wouldn't have went to the psychiatrist, but I did. And I said, you know what, I'm not even sure why I'm here because I feel so different from 2 months ago when I made that phone call for help. And she said, well, base your symptoms on how you were feeling then, because I had to fill out intake forms. So she looks at them and she said, you have severe OCD, anxiety disorder, and depression, and you should never have come off antidepressants. So I'm going to re-prescribe them to you along with Seroquel, an antipsychotic that will help you sleep. So I phoned my boyfriend when I left the appointment and I said, this is what I have, this is what I need. And he said, okay, well, do what you need to do. So I refilled my prescription of the citalopram, 20 milligrams, my original dose, and I skipped the Seroquel because I was like, I don't want to take an antipsychotic. I knew that they come with a lot of side effects, and just the word psychotic just scared me. So I didn't take that, and I started taking my drug again. And I started feeling horrible almost immediately. On about the 4th day, I was sweating through the sheets at night. I was literally shooting out of bed with the most intense cortisol rushes and anxiety and heart palpitations of my life. It was so bad. I remember clutching my phone one night and I'm like, I have to call 911. My heart is pounding through my chest. I just had these rushes of, I don't know what, going through my body. I hadn't slept in like 4 days. I would sleep patchy, like I would kind of just fall asleep and then jolt awake, and my muscles were contracting involuntarily. I was really agitated. I felt out of body. I was having all of these horrible symptoms. And after the 8th day, I was like, I don't think I can continue to take these drugs. I don't know what happened because I felt so great on it for so many years, but I feel absolutely horrific. So I stopped taking them on the 8th day. And I was like, I don't know what has gotten into me, but I'm just going to have to live with it, I guess. So after I stopped the drug again, I was still okay. Like I went kind of back to how I was in October where things were really lifting. And I felt okay for 4 or 5 months. And then in April of 2019, just like as quickly as it left, it all came back. And I don't know why. At that point, my boyfriend and I were fighting a lot. We had been together for about 3.5 years then. And we were moving because our landlord was selling the place we were living in. And so we were looking for a condo, which was stressful. I had given up my school job to get a job with the federal government. That was really stressful. Like moving, changing jobs, fighting. I don't know if it was the stress of it or what, but I just went right back into it. All of my intrusive thoughts came back, my anxiety, my insomnia, everything that I had had months before just came flooding back. And I finally at that point discovered, I just started doing so much research, and I don't know how I came across it, but I was like, I'm in antidepressant withdrawal. I came across the website survivingantidepressants.org, and when I started reading that, I'm like, this is what's wrong with me. This has been what's been wrong with me for the last year. And it was just like a light bulb went off, and I remember telling my boyfriend at that point, we were not doing well, but he said, okay, if that's what's been going on with you, that basically has changed your personality completely in the last year, I don't want you ever touching those drugs again. And I'm like, okay, I won't. I said, by reading this, it seems like most people eventually heal, the nervous system settles down. And so that was that. But it was increasingly difficult to, so I had been working those 4 jobs in that summer of 2018. I was just trying so hard to pay off my debt, but I was just sinking and sinking. And like it continued while, you know, when my symptoms went away in October of 2018. My nanny job had finished, and so I went back to working in the schools, but I was still a part-time receptionist and I was still doing autism intervention. I'd quit my job at the group home, but I still had 3 jobs. And so April 2019, I quit all of my jobs to work for the federal government, which was really stressful job, but it paid a lot more, so that's why I took it. And I still was just on this huge debt paying off journey, and now I was sick on top of it all. So like the symptoms were just getting so hard. It was so hard to continue to work and live a normal life, because when all my symptoms came back, I'm like, oh great, like how am I going to do this again? And so, you know, unable to sleep for 3 days at a time, and just all of the symptoms. So I actually made a list of all of the symptoms that I had over the course of, you know, at that point, it had summer of 2019, it had been about 15 months that I'd been having symptoms, you know, except for those few months where things just kind of lifted. So here's a list of all of the symptoms. So I had, sorry about the dog barking, hopefully that's not too distracting, maybe I'll have to shut the window, but migraines, sinus congestion, which was absolutely constant for the whole first year, involuntary muscle contractions, just a minute, I'm just going to shut the window. Okay, so dry eyes, swelling, light sensitivity, pus, extreme dryness, blurry vision, obsessive, repetitive, intrusive thoughts. So I had these before I ever took drugs, like I shared earlier in the video, but they were like 1,000 times worse now. I mean, they were absolutely constant all day long. Anxiety like never before, panic attacks, weird abstract thoughts. I hadn't had panic attacks in years, except for, you know, when in 2016 and all that, when I thought I was going through burnout, but I'll share with you in a bit what I actually think was going on then. Soul crushing depression. I was suicidal. I had a lot of GI issues, so diarrhea, like to the point where I would be working at school and I'd have to run out of the classroom because I was like, I'm gonna have an accident. Stomach cramping, bloating, excessive gas, heartburn, sharp shooting, stabbing pains in my hip, arms, feet, hands, and stomach. I mean, at one point it got so bad I couldn't even lift my arm. My boyfriend had to brush my hair and feed me. I mean, it was horrible, horrible nerve pain. I had really deep pain in my legs that no painkiller would touch at all. So this is a list of all the symptoms, like I said, over that 15 months from stopping the drug. Derealization, depersonalization, which came in the form of my arms feeling detached. I would see myself in the third person, especially when driving. Like I would see my car from behind and myself from behind. I'd see myself from above. It was really disturbing. Felt really weird in my own skin and behind my own eyes. I couldn't get out of my head ever, just felt trapped in my mind. Insomnia mixed with extreme fatigue, rage, hatred, excessive urination, which was not diabetes related because I've had diabetes type 1 for many, many years, but my sugars were normal. And I mean, I would literally go to the bathroom and within 5 minutes, my bladder would be full. I would go 20 times in a row, and I wasn't excessively drinking. I didn't have high blood sugar. It was just like my bladder was just constantly contracting. I had intolerance to caffeine, music, sounds, talking, light, alcohol, people eating, exercise. Like these would make my symptoms worse. I had convulsion type movements in my body, flapping in my ear, like there was like a bat flapping in it, dry, brittle hair, flashbacks, sobbing. My period stopped completely for like the first 6 months. And then when it did return, I would bleed for like 4 hours. I mean, it was not normal. And I had not had issues with my period ever before. Nightmares, extreme muscle tension, especially in my upper arms, also in my neck and shoulders. So I had all of these symptoms that could not be correlated to anything else. I mean, a lot of these symptoms I ended up going and seeing a doctor about, like the pain and cramping in my stomach. They did all types of ultrasounds and x-rays and CT scans, and they were looking for appendicitis and ovarian cysts, and they could never find a basis for any of it. And then for my extreme eye dryness, I ended up going to an optometrist who diagnosed me with meibomian gland dysfunction. She said my eyes literally weren't producing any oil. So the oil glands around the eyes that keep the moisture in, mine weren't producing oil at all. So, I mean, the dryness was so bad. I would wake up in the night and I wouldn't even be able to see. My eyes would be so blurry from absolutely no moisture whatsoever. So I got diagnosed with hip impingement because at one point my joints and my nerve pain and everything was so bad. My hips started to pop. So I'd be walking and it would pop and then it would buckle and it would, my body would fall because my whole hip would just buckle completely. And again, there was no basis for that. There was no history of it. There was no injury. There was no falls or accidents. Nobody could tell me why I had any of these symptoms all of a sudden. Same with the excessive urination. I mean, I saw doctor after doctor after doctor. I was seeing physios and chiros and massage therapists, and none of it would really touch any of my pain, my stiffness. So once I started doing more research into withdrawal, I'm like, this is what's going on with me. These drugs profoundly changed my nervous system, and now I'm having all of these symptoms. So I put up with it. In July of 2019, I couldn't work anymore because when the symptoms came back in April, I was like, like I said, I would go days without sleep. I was always sick. I was always so anxious. I had so many intrusive thoughts. Like I had a hard time thinking. And I mean, everything was in such shambles. I could barely, have my relationship anymore because I felt like I couldn't contribute anything. I was like, I'm just consumed with these symptoms 24/7. So I made the very difficult decision at the end of August of 2019, after 4 years together, to leave my relationship. It was so difficult. I loved him so much, but I just couldn't deal with all of the debt and all of the symptoms anymore. And so, we had this really difficult breakup. I packed my bags after 17 years of being on my own and moved back in with my mom. Which was so difficult because I was 37 years old and I'm like, I felt embarrassed, but I was so worn out. And so I think what happened in 2015 and 16, so I've just learned so much about how these drugs work. A lot of people go through what's called I believe tachyphylaxis or poop out. So the drugs typically stop working after a while and you need to increase the dose or add drugs. I mean, it's just like anything else that you take. You eventually need more and more and more for your body to produce the same results. So I think that's what was happening to me in 2015 and 16. I was getting all these breakthrough symptoms because at that point I had been on the drug for 4 and 5 years and it just wasn't working like it used to. And so, but I just never correlated it with the drug. So I never sought my doctor's help for it. I just didn't. And so I think that's what was producing all of those undiagnosable, I guess, symptoms. So I moved home in September of 2019. It took a month for me to get all of my stuff packed and moved. And I went on this crazy plan. At that point, I had been off the drug reinstatement. Like I said, I reinstated in November of 2018. I had been off of the reinstatement for 10 months. So I move home and I get this job online teaching English to students in China, which requires you to work really weird hours because there's a 14-hour time difference. So I start teaching like one class a day. And it's like really stressful because it's like I'd never been an actual teacher before and I was scared of having technical issues and them not speaking any English. And so I started doing that and I would cry after every single class because I was like, oh, I'm never going to get used to this. I miss my boyfriend. What has happened to me? I had always been someone who had I had been a group home manager for years and living on my own. And now I'm living with my mom and I can barely handle working and I don't sleep. And I'm like, what is this drug done to me? So I'm still dealing with a lot of symptoms at this point, but it's easier because I'm not working all the time and I'm able to actually relax my body and mind. And so after about a month or two of teaching, I'm getting a little more comfortable and I'm opening my schedule more and more because it's self-employment. And so I start teaching more and more and get more and more comfortable. Then I get a casual job at the college tutoring. It was really good pay. And it was, again, I could make my own schedule. So it was pretty chill and not anything too crazy stressful. So, and then I also get a job delivering food in the evenings. This is over the course of weeks, okay? So I start getting more and more jobs. So then I'm working, all of a sudden I have this full-blown work schedule. So, but I have no distractions. I'm not focusing on, making friends or getting dating or anything like that. I'm here to pay off my debt and get healthy. So I work my butt off. I'm literally working 7 days a week for a full year. So from October of 2019 to October of 2020, I'm working 7 days a week, 3 jobs, and I'm just paying down tons and tons and tons of debt. So when I came here, I had 7 loans. I was still catching up from all of the collectors and all of the things that I had gotten so far behind in from all of my bad money decisions from 2017 and 16 and 18 even. And so I literally come to fall of 2020. I had been off of the reinstatement for 22 months in September of 2020. I paid off 6 of my 7 loans and I'm starting to get my life back, but I'm still having like looping intrusive thoughts. I'm still having some muscle issues. And I'm like, at this point, I'm like, this has got to be more than withdrawal. This cannot still be withdrawal. And keep in mind, if you know anything about withdrawal, when you come off these drugs, especially cold turkey or not tapered properly, and you're sensitive like me, you're supposed to stay free of everything. Like, you're not supposed to really take, I mean, according to people who know a lot about this, you're not really supposed to take supplements or drink alcohol or, take antibiotics, anything that can further affect the brain and nervous system. But I just thought, I don't need to listen to that. I don't have extreme reactions when I take these things. Like, I think it's fine. So I was drinking alcohol all throughout this 22 months, taking antibiotics when I needed them, taking tons of supplements because I just so desperately wanted my brain to shut up. And so finally in October of 2020, I was like, enough is enough. I must be mentally ill. There must be something else wrong with me. I must have full-blown OCD now. I just have these looping thoughts that don't stop. So I make the grave decision to reinstate. So I had been off the drugs for 22 months, like I said, from my reinstatement in November of 2018. But I knew not enough about withdrawal in these drugs at this point from all the researching I had done that when you reinstate, especially after many, many months off, you should always take a microdose and you should always go back on the same drug. So I'm like, okay, citalopram was my drug for 7 years. I'm going to do water titration and I'm going to take 0.5 milligram. So keep in mind, my original dose for 7 years was 20 milligrams. And I'm like, I'm only going to take 0.5 milligram. So I take 0.5 milligram and immediately I feel worse. I start getting insomnia and cortisol rushes that are shooting me out of bed. Extreme anxiety. My thoughts got way more aggressive and way more, I started like hallucinating, and you would think at that point it would be a red flag and be like, okay, this is not your problem. Like, your problem is not mental illness that needs treatment. Your problem is the drugs. Like, you went off them too quickly. Your nervous system is compromised. Your brain's been changed. But I didn't listen. At that point, I was so into researching drugs and what works best for OCD and I had different doctors and different psychiatrists, and I was too afraid to take full doses like they wanted me to because I had a new care team here where I was living with my mom, and I was, like I said, taking these micro doses, but I was having severe reactions even to those. But I kept pushing through. And what I would do is I would take the drug for a couple of days, freak out, stop. Then I'd stop for 5-6 days, be like, no, I can't live with this anymore. All this stuff in my brain, I'm going to try again. So I would stop and start and stop and start, which is something you should not do. So I did that, and I ended up, I reinstated October 26, 2020. By the end of November, I believe it was the 23rd or 24th, I woke up one morning at 4 a.m. like I always did to teach English. And I stood up out of my bed and I went to the bathroom and I just started projectile vomiting. And I ended up collapsing on the bathroom floor and I ended up going to the ER. My heart rate was like 150. My blood pressure was low. I was so ill. And I said to them in the ER, I said, I think like I've been taking these psychiatric drugs again and I think I'm having an adverse reaction. And they're like, okay, well, in case you are, we're not going to give you citalopram here in the hospital. And I'm like, well, I don't know if I should just stop because now I've been taking it again. They wouldn't give me any. I met with a psychiatrist inpatient because I wasn't in the psych ward, but I was in the hospital because they were trying to figure out if it was diabetes related or celiac, and they didn't know what was wrong with me. And I have all of these other health issues. So they admitted me for 4 days to assess me and figure out what was going on. So I ended up meeting with an internist and a new psychiatrist. And so the psychiatrist says you have severe OCD. You need to take not citalopram, that's not the best drug for OCD. I'm going to put you on Prozac. So she switches me to Prozac, 10 milligrams, but again, I refuse to take 10 milligrams. So when I get out of the hospital, I tell my pharmacist I want only to take 2 milligrams and I want the liquid version. Actually, I know I didn't tell him I was taking 2 milligrams. I said I want the liquid version so I could measure out a smaller than 10 milligram dose. So he gives me 2 milligrams or he gives me the liquid and I start taking 2 milligrams. And so I'm released from the hospital. Nobody knows what's wrong with me. They further referred me to like a gynecologist because I had been having trouble with my period for years. They refer me, so I get this new psychiatrist. They refer me to an endocrinologist because of my diabetes and my celiac. And what was the other one? Well, then they want to have me get like ultrasounds and all this stuff for all of my gastro issues. Like, why was I projectile vomiting? All these things. So I go home or come home and I start to take Prozac and I start feeling really weird on Prozac. I'm taking 2 milligrams for 4 days. I'm like super disoriented. I started having suicidal thoughts out of nowhere, like really dark suicidal thoughts. I'm dizzy. I just feel drugged. Like I feel like my head just doesn't feel right. And I'm like, I don't feel well. And I was just lethargic and my quality of life had went so far downhill. I mean, just a month or two earlier, I was working 3 jobs at the college, teaching English online, delivering food. I was making the most money I'd ever made in my life, paid off all this debt, and I was truly getting better, but I still had these couple of stubborn symptoms that I thought could not still be withdrawal. So all of a sudden I'm taking Prozac. I'm literally like quit my delivery job because I couldn't handle it anymore. I cut my teaching way back because I just was like consumed with all these symptoms that were getting worse and worse and worse again, and new symptoms. I'm sick all the time. I'm like can't sleep. And so the only thing I'm doing is working casually at the college and teaching a few online classes. So my life had drastically deteriorated after like only a month. So then I'm like, I call the psychiatrist. I'm like, I can't take this Prozac anymore. I'm not feeling well at all. So then she switches me to Zoloft. And then I had all these weird reactions to Zoloft. So I'm like, I'm not listening to anybody anymore. I'm going back on citalopram. I'm pushing through. I don't care how hard it is. I need to get back to feeling normal. I haven't felt normal in over 2 years. Something's wrong with me. Like, I don't know what it is, but I was great on this drug for years. So I start taking citalopram again, low dose. I think I was taking 2.5 milligrams. First day, I start getting this intense vibrating in my legs, and my legs are like shaking and quivering. And I'm like, what is going on? And I'm like, oh no, I hope I don't have akathisia. So if you're unfamiliar, akathisia is a side effect of mostly psychiatric medications, but it can come from antibiotics, antiemetics, like nausea medications. They don't know exactly what causes it. They think it can be something to do with dopamine. Nobody really knows, but it causes intense suicidality. It can be a real horrific thing to go through. So I'm just like, I don't know if that's what this is. I wasn't really trusting in medical people anymore because nobody was helping me with any of my symptoms. So I'm like, I push through and take citalopram for another 10 days. And it's the feeling in my body is getting worse and worse and worse. At this point, I'm going to bed and I'm literally, my whole body is jerking violently. I couldn't sleep for 5 days straight. I'm just out of my mind with the most severe anxiety, severe intrusive thoughts. I mean, I just felt completely out of my mind. I mean, I was literally like sleeping with my mom. I couldn't work at all anymore. And this was in December of 2020. So then I don't even remember where I got it. I had a 10-pill prescription for Ativan, so a benzodiazepine, and I'm like, I've got to get some sleep because I hadn't slept for 5 days and I'm having severe dissociation, like my whole body's just a mess. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure I've got akathisia at this point. So I start taking Ativan and my gut instinct told me only take this for 4 days. And I ignored my gut instinct again. And I started going on the withdrawal forums that were saying, okay, because I started sleeping after I started taking Ativan and things kind of in my body were calming down. And they said, if you're having improvement, keep going, stay on it for like several months, stabilize your nervous system, and then start doing a micro taper. So I listened to them instead of my gut instinct. I start taking Ativan daily, 1 milligram, and I split it into 3 doses. So I would take like 50 or like half a milligram, I believe, at night, and then a quarter in the morning and a quarter at supper time. And I was like, I felt great on it for like 2 weeks. It was taking away all of my intrusive thoughts that I had had for so long at that point. It was taking away all of my anxiety. I was sleeping like a baby. I'm like, this is a freaking miracle drug. I was so pleased. I wasn't taking an antidepressant at this point, just Ativan. So I take Ativan for a couple of weeks, and January rolls around, and I'm like, and then I started getting the intrusive thoughts more frequently again, and I'm like, something's got to give. So I found out in my province, TMS, so transcranial magnetic stimulation, is covered under insurance, like provincial insurance. So I apply for it, I get approved because of my severe OCD. And it's not technically approved for OCD, it's approved for depression. But because I had a previous diagnosis of depression, anxiety, and OCD, they're like, you're a perfect candidate. So my mom and I pack our bags for 2 months and we move 2 hours away to stay in this temporary location for me to get TMS treatment for 40 days. I start seeing the psychiatrist there. I go through the TMS and I'm just like, I don't feel good. I'm still taking Ativan at this point. I'm telling her about my severe intrusive thoughts, like just looping and looping and looping and looping and looping, violence. And at this point, it was like paired with hallucinations, like all kinds of things. So she, assesses me, I start getting TMS, and she's like, you have akathisia. I'm like, great. So she's like, but we have to treat your severe intrusives. Excuse me. So she puts me on Seroquel, the antipsychotic I had been prescribed 2 years ago by my other psychiatrist. And she said, this will help your intrusive thoughts, but because you're so sensitive and you have akathisia, I'm just going to put you on 6.25 milligrams when a normal starting dose is 25. So I start taking a quarter of a Seroquel. This is while I'm out of town, and I'm still kind of teaching online because it's a portable job. So I'm doing that while I'm gone just to keep some income. I'm taking Seroquel and Ativan and getting TMS. Well, that was when I started pacing. So I take Seroquel and I start pacing. I can't sit down. It's like doing a dance. Everything in my body was just, it felt like there was bugs crawling in it. I was just like out of my mind at this point. And I start like violently, okay, so I don't know how to say it. So bowel movements, tons and tons of blood. So I'm extremely concerned. My mom is extremely concerned. I go to my psychiatrist and I said, I think Seroquel is causing me to bleed heavily when I have a bowel movement. She's like, no, that's not from Seroquel. Go to the walk-in doctor. I think you just have hemorrhoids. So I go to a walk-in doctor and he does all these tests and he's like, you don't have fissures, you don't have hemorrhoids. I don't know what's causing your bleeding. And I'm like, again, my intuition is screaming at me, it's the Seroquel. So I had taken Seroquel for 5 days. I was pacing. I felt like I had a brick on my head. I was extremely lethargic and it did nothing for my intrusive thoughts. So I stopped taking the Seroquel. And then we decided to try Luvox, which is another SSRI. So at this point, I had tried Citalopram, Prozac, Zoloft, Seroquel, Ativan. Now I'm trying Luvox, which is specifically for OCD. I'm like, okay, so again, I start on a low dose. I didn't have a severe reaction, but it made me so tired that I slept through my classes and almost got fired from my job because I had a little bit of work left still teaching English. So I'm like, this is making me so lethargic. And then, so I upped the dose because that's what I was told to do, slowly build up the dose because we got to get it to work in the brain on these intrusives. So I start seeing like demonic images, like trigger warning. I was seeing, if you don't want to watch this, just fast forward through this, but I start seeing like demonic faces, upside down crosses, cloaked men. And I'm like, I'm losing my freaking mind. I don't know what's gotten into me. I've never been like this in my whole life. I literally went on these drugs for situational depression when I lost my job. Ever since I went off them, I've just been crazy. And I thought that I was mentally ill. So I try going back on. I get akathisia. I start getting all of these symptoms I had never had before. So I'm still getting TMS. I was like, by my 11th treatment, I'm like, no, this is not helping. I'm feeling worse than ever. I'm pacing. I'm like pooping all this blood out. I'm seeing all these images. I'm like, I don't know what is in these drugs and what you guys are doing to me, but I'm done. So I literally I want to be out of, I can't do this anymore. My poor brain. So I stopped taking Seroquel. She's like, well, continue with the Ativan because if it helps your akathisia, because it had been helping, but I felt like it wasn't anymore. And I'm like, I'm so confused at this point. So I'm like, but aren't benzos addictive? Because Ativan's a benzo. She's like, no, you're only on 1 milligram a day. You should be fine. So I'm like, oh, but I want to start tapering. So I'm like, I got to get off these drugs. She prescribed me a beta blocker, propranolol, which is supposed to help akathisia. So I'm feeling like I'm just treating drug side effects with more drugs and more drugs and more drugs. And I'm just a freaking mess at this point. So I stopped taking the Luvox because it's making me too tired. I stopped taking the Seroquel because of all the blood. I'm going to do a micro taper off Ativan, and I'm taking propranolol, which is just a beta blocker. It's not a psych drug. So we leave the TMS, we leave town, we come back home, and I'm just like a hot mess, like to say the least. So I start micro tapering. So I'm cutting 1/100th of a milligram a day tapering. I'm doing a water titration taper off Ativan. So I get down to 0.6 of Ativan. So I had done like a 40-day taper at that point. I was down to 0.6. And my body is literally convulsing like so bad. I wake up one morning and I had taken my Ativan, which was supposed to help the jerking. Because when I had started taking it, I had the full body jerking. The Ativan helped like crazy. And now I was taking the Ativan and it was jerking severely. I come into my mom's room one morning and she's bawling her eyes out because my whole body is just going crazy and it's just throwing itself, it's contorting, and I was like, she's calling 911. They come and they're like, I got treated like a mental patient. They're like, you have severe anxiety. I'm like, this is not anxiety. My whole body was vibrating. I'm like, I've been told I have akathisia, and they're like, oh, akathisia can be from anxiety. I'm like, I've had anxiety for 30 years. This is not anxiety. And I'm just like, my whole body. So they throw me into the psych ward. I'm pacing around the psych ward. I'm literally standing there in front of the nurse, and my whole body is bending at the waist, like that, over and over and over. My body was jerking so bad, and they just looked at me and they had no idea what to do with me. They had no idea. So they're throwing me all these different drugs, antipsychotics, more benzos. And I'm like, I'm so done with you people. This is why I'm like this in the first place. I've been so medically mismanaged. I was, taken off these drugs too fast, put on them to begin with when I didn't even need them. Never been mentally ill in my life. And I'm like, now I'm just, my whole body and mind are a complete mess.
Charcoal for headaches, bloating, gas, skin issues.
Because they want you on drugs.
Colds.
And then you end up like me.
Colds, food poisoning, activated charcoal, bombs, waste, toxins for removal off the body. Why don't doctors tell you about?
Yeah, it just does it on its own.
Oh my.
Yeah. Kind of just comes and goes. Yeah. And it hurts a lot too.
Why is it always at night?
And it's always on the left. It's because akathisia is always at night and in the morning usually when you're trying to lay still. Yeah. So I'm in the psych ward. I'm like, I'm out of here. I'm not taking your drugs anymore. You people don't help me. Goodbye. And so I leave against medical advice. I sign the discharge papers. I'm gone. So because I was in the ward, I now had a crisis care team who I had to check in with all the time. And I'm like, I'm having these severe intrusives. My whole body feels like it's electrified. I don't know what's wrong with me, but I feel beyond damaged. I felt so poisoned at this point. I forgot to mention when I was in the hospital, they cold turkeyed me off Ativan. I'm like, isn't that bad? This is a benzo that I've been taking every day for 2.5 months. They're like, no, you're only on 1 milligram. You won't get withdrawal from that.
Good grief.
I'm like, wow, okay. So then they were offering me benzos in the psych ward, but it was just sporadic. And I was like, I don't think that's a good idea. Like, my body feels so damaged. And so they wouldn't give me like regular Ativan, like my body had become accustomed to. And I think the Ativan had went paradoxical at that point, because when I was taking it before my mom called 911, I would literally take a dose and I would be jerking severely. I mean, my whole body was bad. It was bad. So I leave the hospital and I'm like, I've got to just heal. I got to believe that I can just heal. So I started seeking out people online who had been through what I'd been through and had healed without the use of any more drugs. And it was just severe withdrawal syndrome, protracted. And I'm like, that's what was wrong with me all along. So I get out of the hospital and I'm just like, I'm barely functioning at this point. So I want to list you all of the symptoms that I had. Actually, these aren't even all of them. I listed some of them when I was taking like the Seroquel and had the bleeding, but this is everything I had. So I listed you my symptoms before I reinstated all of these drugs in October of 2020. This is now what I had after. So, because remember, when I went back on the drugs in October of 2020, I only had the looping thoughts and a kind of some muscle tension and contractions. This is what I now had. Extreme anxiety, akathisia, pacing, tinnitus, screaming ears, migraines, which I had before, but worse. They're worse now. Severe eye pain, which was also worse now. Frequent urination, which was back. That had been gone. Insomnia, but way worse than before. I had more severe intrusive thoughts. I mean, they were so bad that I had like prayer meetings for me, pastors at my house, people anointing me with oil, because it was like satanic at this point. Like, it was just something had taken over my mind, and I had never had a history of this in my life, anything like this. Hallucinations. So my psychiatrist called it pseudo hallucinations, somatic hallucinations. I was sensing on my skin what I was thinking about. I was having a visceral reaction to my mind. It was so messed up. Full body jerking. I wish we would have captured what this was like, because I mean, of course, it was so distressing. It would have been probably my mom's not first instinct to pull out a camera and film me that day that she called 911, but I wish I would have video proof. I do have some video of my body jerking, but at those points, it had somewhat started to settle. So I'll show you guys what it looked like. It was more like spasming at that point. Agitation, restlessness, burning skin. So this is something a lot of people with akathisia experience, especially the inner akathisia. So your whole body is just burning. Like, it's like this burning skin feeling that goes along with inner vibration. So for me, what happens is it feels like my body is vibrating, like my nerves, especially in my sternum, like where my vagus nerve would be. It's like this vibrating feeling. And then my whole body feels like it's on fire, and then my muscles, and it's like something squeezes me from the inside. Everything is being squeezed really tight, and it's not a muscle tension. It's like a boa constrictor wrapped around my body, squeezing it so tight that it feels like I'm gonna lose the ability to breathe. Intense body odor, never had in my life. It's like a detoxing type of reaction. Itching, my whole body just itchy. Squeezing, like I said, nausea and benzo flu. I mean, for a couple of weeks, I would wake up after I got out of the hospital every morning, just dry heaving, gagging, so intensely sick. Barely could eat anything at all. Really swollen face. Paresthesia, so I get the sensation like there's hot spiders tickling, like, or walking all over, especially where I'd have a beard, like right in here, like there's like these hot spiders crawling, or like someone's splashing scalding hot water both on my head and in my face. Really distressing. Really fast heartbeat, so tachycardia. I had that for a couple of months. Really dry eyes, like I said, severe face and head pain. I ended up going on antibiotics a couple of months ago because I thought I had a sinus infection, because I have a history of chronic sinus infections. Turns out it's just severe nerve pain and burning. Intense sugar cravings. I gained 30 pounds in a couple of months because I had gotten nice and slim last year when my first withdrawal from citalopram. I couldn't lose weight at all the first year, and then in the second year the body just kind of naturally shifted to get all that cortisol out of the body, and then I started naturally losing all the weight I had gained from when I took antidepressants for those years. But Ativan just gave me the insane sugar cravings, and so I gained 30 pounds. So I know this video is getting long, I need to kind of wrap it up, but it's been the worst experience of my life. So when I got out of the last day that I took Ativan was February 21st of 2021. So it's been about 6.5 months that I've been off psych drugs. And I also stopped the propranolol on April 26th. I had taken it for about 4 or 5 months. It helped physically some of the akathisia symptoms. But again, it's one of those things where you just have to keep increasing the dose and then you have to taper. And I'm like, I'm so done with this like train that I'm on. So I just wanted to be drug free. And now, like I said, I took antibiotics in June for what I thought was a sinus infection. It was just nerve pain. So that kind of threw me back. But I've been alcohol free now for over 5 months, psych drug free for 6.5 months, all pharmaceutical free for 3 months. So since my last antibiotic bout, worst experience of my life. For some reason, some people, these psychiatric drugs like profoundly affect the nervous system, and they can't come off easily, and it's a real nightmare. And so my akathisia, like my full body jerking, it lasted from December until August. In July, I had one more severe bout where my whole body was contorting into these weird positions and jerking. And just again, my mom was in tears and bawling, and then it just stopped. So I just believe that the body has an innate capability to heal, and so I'm done putting anything into it that is going to affect my nervous system even more. I still have a lot of those symptoms I just listed. The akathisia comes and goes now. It's not constant. The jerking has gone. I guess I can just list some of the symptoms. So anxiety, I don't have a ton of anymore. I don't rarely pace anymore, maybe once a month. Tinnitus, my ears still ring almost all the time. Migraines come and go. The eye pain comes and goes. The frequent urination is mostly gone. Insomnia is gone. I sleep like a baby now, thankfully. Intrusive thoughts I still struggle with really bad. I think if I wouldn't have reinstated, they'd be gone by now. Hallucinations I still struggle with. Full body jerking is gone. It kind of worked its way from like full body to like half body to one side of the body to just the arm, and then it went away. It kind of just melted away, I guess you could say. Agitation, I don't have a lot of anymore. Restlessness, sometimes, but not much. Burning skin, I still struggle with. BO, off and on. Itching, off and on. Squeezing goes with the full body vibrations, and the burning skin, those go together. So my body will start to vibrate internally, and then the burning and squeezing come along with it. It's very, very distressing. The nausea and benzo flu are pretty much gone. Swollen face comes and goes, but that could be from my history of sinus infections and allergies. The paresthesia is getting a lot better, but it still comes and goes. Tachycardia is gone. The dry eyes still can be pretty severe. The face and head pain comes and goes. The sugar cravings are getting way better, but I've really changed my diet, which has helped. And then the weight gain is still, like, I still have gained a lot of weight. That's really, I'm having a hard time losing, I think, because the cortisol levels are still so high. So anyway, I'm going to wrap this up, but I'm actually off work for 12 months. I finally saw a neurologist who confirmed that this was damage from psychiatric drugs, what I'm going through. And she said she's seen it before. My GP's on board. It's on my medical forms, akathisia and movement disorder. I still have pretty severe mental stuff, but I do get breaks from it now. Where not full breaks, but I'll have days that are much more manageable. I'm still not working, but I'm able to leave. Like, I was completely housebound around the time when I was in the psych ward, and my body was jerking all the time, and I was sleeping with my mom. I was housebound at that point. It's getting better. I'm slowly being able to do more and more and more, but many people find that these types of things take months and years to heal from. So my advice to you is, if you're in this, please, like, I've been in this for 3.5 years now, and I've learned that it's very likely not a new disorder that cropped up overnight if you went off these drugs too quickly, meaning usually based on what doctors say, and you're having symptoms, it's very likely withdrawal and can last a very long time. But just stay drug free. Don't drink alcohol. This is just my personal experience and all the peoples I've talked to and everything I've been through. Give your nervous system a chance to heal itself and rest. Don't overstimulate yourself too much. Try to stay away from stress as much as possible, and things really do get better. But it's been the worst experience of my life.
I just want to die. I want to die. There's just no point. I'm so depressed. I'm so sick of hallucinating and having intrusives all day long. Like, it's so exhausting to have this for so long. Like, I just don't know what's wrong with my brain. It's so hard to deal with.
I regret ever taking psychiatric drugs. My personal belief is that most people don't need them. They should only be used in severe cases and for short term, because that's all they were ever approved for and tested for. So I just think people are kept on these drugs way too long, and you just don't know what they're going to do. And especially if you have to come off, like if you get pregnant or you're forced to come off them or you want to come off them. I recently had a very good friend I met in this process pass away because she couldn't take the symptoms anymore, and again was pulled off them in the wrong way, and her nervous system just went completely crazy, and she's no longer with us. So be very careful. If you have any questions, let me know. I'm sorry this was so long, but it was I wanted to give all the details and just let you know where I had come from before the drugs, and then what happened when I came off once, and then when I went back on and kindled my nervous system, meaning, went off and on and off and on too many times, different psychiatric drugs, different classes. So I've been on everything. I've been on antidepressants, benzos, and antipsychotics, got TMS, and just be really careful. Like, it's given me a lot of PTSD, what I've been through. Akathisia is life-changing, and it's no joke. So keep going and stay drug-free. And if you're thinking of taking psychiatric drugs, be very, very careful. Please turn over every stone before you take them, because they are not as benign as people say they are and doctors say they are.
I'm still trying to mourn my life. Everything I lost. I miss my health. I miss my nervous system. I miss my life so much. I miss my jobs. My body just feels so sick and so poisoned.
You often get misdiagnosed, and especially akathisia took me a long time to get properly diagnosed with, and someone to actually acknowledge that I was mistreated, and that's why I'm in the state that I'm in. It's not because I have some type of organic mental disorder. I've talked to so many people going through the same thing, and we all have the same story, so it's definitely a real thing. But I'm going to end this now. Let me know if you have any questions. Hopefully you guys are all doing okay, and hopefully I didn't leave anything out, but it's been so long I need to stop this now, so I'll see you next time. Bye.